was an American, if you keep throwing back Donald Trump's comments, I'm going to look up Boris Johnson's comments and give them right back to you. We're
You
not the only country with some strange political leaders.
I want to start with a story which is now high in the headlines. Donald Trump facing freshly worked indictment for seeking to illegally overturn the 2020 election. The prosecutors are trying to get round that Supreme Court ruling that he was covered by presidential privilege. Can you tell us a bit more about that case? And in as far as it's possible to judge, do the prosecutors believe they have a fair fighting chance of dealing with that Supreme Court ruling?
On the second part, let me not speculate, but what's happened is the Supreme Court, in a rather remarkable ruling a few months ago, said presidents have immunity for any official act. The indictment, the original indictment, cited conversations or communications between Trump and government officials. So what the prosecutors have done is to strip those facts out of the superseding indictment and focus on conversations he had as a politician, as a campaigner. Whether that will stick depends very much on judicial interpretations. And depending on what court this happens in, some of the judges are very sympathetic to Trump, some less so. What we can say is none of this is going to be decided before the election. So Trump has already won that fight to push this past election day. If he's elected, he can snuff these cases out.
Yeah, impossible to call it with certainty. The Supreme Court took the decision that they took. They do have a conservative majority. We will just have to wait and see when that time comes. Just briefly, the accusations that we're talking about here, we are familiar with the nature of them, but they're wide-ranging and they're so serious, aren't they? The ranging from an attempt to distort the process of certifying the election of 2020 in Congress, to the former president, putting pressure on his vice president to distort his duties as vice president.
Fundamentally, and there are a series of indictments, but in this particular case, it is the accusation that Trump attempted to persuade people to push the decision back to state legislatures in various states and giving them the power to decide who won the electoral votes rather than the certified counts. It would take much more time than we have to go through the knotty specifics, but that's essentially the charge. That Trump was persuading everybody from his own Justice Department to the Defense Department to people in Congress to people back in the states counting the votes. Don't let this vote go on. And as I say, in terms of this election, I think we can safely say that Trump has succeeded in pushing this off the table. I don't think he's going to be sentenced in New York for the hush money charges. And so what we're at now, if I can jump ahead, if that's okay, is a race that remains very close, that has been upended in a way that we haven't seen in American history with the replacement of a president, much more like what you folks do. You know, you're happy with dumping a sitting prime minister who gets in political trouble because you've got a parliamentary system. We don't do it that way. And this is a remarkable resurgence of traditional political party power, where the powers that be said, I'm sorry, we don't care about the primaries. You can't win and you've got to step down. So right away, we're in history.
Well, in that sense, you say maybe a reversion to what used to be normality, but still pretty extraordinary. And as is the campaign. Let's pick up on a couple of examples. Now, we've seen, haven't we now, Donald Trump, starting with him, I know, trying to invoke divine intervention in his corner. This is Donald Trump talking to the TV personality, Dr. Phil. Just have a listen.
It has to be God. I mean, how can you say it's luck when it's, 20 million to 1, okay? I mean, it's just not possible that I was in that position. It's the only position where that bullet could have missed.
And you believe in God?
I do.
You believe God's hand was in this that day?
I believe so, yeah, I do.
And you talk about the country. You believe you have more to do. You weren't done. You were spared for a reason.
Well, God believes that, I guess.
God believes that, I guess. I mean, to our ears, extraordinary stuff. How does it sound to you?
Whenever anybody says that God has put me in a position, I'm impressed by the two-way communication that must exist. You can always raise the question of, okay, if God spared you, why was it necessary to kill an innocent bystander? This is sort of theology 101.
Sure.
He's not the only person, by the way, who has asserted this. Ronald Reagan, in a much less self-focused way, when he survived his assassination attempt, he said, "I have to believe that I'm here for a purpose." But it wasn't quite the assertion that, God put his finger on the situation.
Yeah.
But I have to say, if you're going to go and pick out some strange comments of the former president, you'd have to do a telethon. I mean,
Yes.
one of the remarkable things about Trump, and as a political matter, it is astonishing, is he has said over the past, I don't know, 8 years, so many things that for anybody else would have been dispositive, that
Yeah.
would have ended the career, that you have to recognize that in some way, Trump has managed to convince roughly half the country at this point that he should be put back in the presidency, and that these comments either should not be taken literally or don't override the policies that they like. It is a story of survival, political survival, in the face of daunting evidence that historians will be writing about for a century.
Well, indeed, I'm just gonna mention another one because they do leave us using a British colloquialism, a little bit gobsmacked, to be honest. This is Donald Trump talking to Dr. Phil, TV's Dr. Phil, on his claim to be the choice of the most ultra pro-democratic state in the union, pretty much, California.
If Jesus came down and was the vote counter, I would win California, okay? In other words, if we had an honest vote counter, a really honest vote counter, I'd do great with the Hispanics, great. I mean, at a level that no Republican's ever done. But if we had an honest vote counter, I would win California.
Well, again, I mean, you have to wonder, and I suppose we can't answer, but you have to wonder, does Donald Trump believe that himself? When it comes to election nights and the pundits are figuring out which state is going to go which way, what the result is going to be, they take California as red, before the votes are even cast. Who is Donald Trump trying to convince with an argument like that?
You've put your finger on something that is still a mystery. I think to some extent, when Donald Trump says that, in some way he believes that. It's he can lie at other times, but look, he has a 58-story building in Manhattan. He claims it's 68 stories. The official building records say no, it's 58 stories, but it's 68 stories. He claims that he would have won California in 2016, which he lost by 5 million votes, if it weren't for all the illegal aliens. And at the risk of being an amateur shrink, what I think is it is inconceivable to him, that he could lose an honest election. Therefore, if he loses California by 5 million votes, it's because there are 5 million illegal votes. He believes he was Time Magazine's Man of the Year 2 times more than he was. This is, as I say, and I have to tell you, as an American, if you keep throwing back Donald Trump's comments, I'm going to look up Boris Johnson's comments and give them right back to you. We're not the only country with some strange political leaders.